Get out before Naledi steps into my bedroom.
So this is really your final decision? Are you sure this is the only home I can walk into?
You have nowhere else to go. You own this entire estate?
I built the life you never cared to see.
Winter sunlight streamed through the towering glass walls of the Sandton Convention Center, casting a pale golden glow over the architectural models displayed across the exhibition hall. Refilwe was 28 at the time, standing before the first design ever presented under her own name. She wore a neatly tailored turquoise dress with orange and white endebele, geometric patterns around the collar. She was not the most noticeable person in the room, but anyone who paused long enough before her community housing model could see that every detail had been carefully considered. Refilwe did not design buildings merely to impress people. She designed them so that people could live better inside them. Her father had been a construction worker in Johannesburg, a man with rough hands who treated every one of his daughter's drawings as though it was something precious. He often told her that a good wall should do more than remain standing. It should protect the person behind it. Her mother was a secondary school teacher who had spent nearly 30 years teaching students who did not always have enough books but still had every right to dream of a larger life. From them, Refilwe learned that honest work did not need to be loud to have value. That morning, she was explaining the project's natural ventilation system to a group of investors when she noticed Thabiso Modlefe standing at the far end of the exhibition booth. He wore a charcoal suit, a white shirt, and a wine-red tie, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thabiso did not look at the model first. He looked at her. "You make a drainage system sound like poetry," he said after the visitors walked away. Refilwe laughed. Only someone who has never lived in the flooded house would think drainage is boring. Thabiso handed her one of the coffees and leaned closer to study the model. He did not pretend to understand everything. He asked thoughtful questions about local materials, maintenance costs, and construction methods, then listened to her answers without interrupting. That impressed Refilwe more than his expensive suit or confident smile. Thabiso was 32 then and had recently founded a luxury event planning company called Molef Signature. He understood how to transform an ordinary room into a place where people wanted to be seen, but his company still lacked a clear identity. He explained that he was searching for someone to design the space for a small brand launch in Sandton. Refilwe assumed it was simply a polite conversation. 3 weeks later, she agreed to work with him. Their first project took place in a glass-walled gallery overlooking Maud Street. Thabiso wanted everything to look expensive, more flowers, more lighting, and enough glamour for every guest to take photographs. Refilwe removed nearly half what he had proposed. She replaced imported backdrops with dark wooden panels made by local artisans, used swana pattern fabric as accents, and arranged the lighting so that guests would not only look at the stage but also notice one another. The event was more successful than either of them had expected. A hotel group invited Molefe's Signature to organize a new series of events. 2 other investors asked who had designed the space. Thabiso did not hesitate. "Refilwe Dintwe," he said. "She sees what I overlook." Those words remained with her for a long time. Over the next 2 years, they fell in love while building their careers. Refilwe and her closest friend, Boipolo Segobela, founded Moza Heritage Living, a small studio specializing in restoring neglected buildings. Meanwhile, Thabiso expanded his company from 4 employees to 23. They often met at the end of the day, eating dinner at elegant restaurants around Nelson Mandela Square, while debating budgets, materials, and colors as though they were sitting on the floor of an unfinished room. Thabiso had once been proud of her intelligence. At least, that was what Refilwe had believed. After they married, Thabiso's company entered a crisis when a major client suddenly cancelled its contract. He stopped sleeping properly, became irritable, and feared that everything he had built would collapse. Refilwe temporarily stepped away from the daily management of Moza Heritage Living to help stabilize her husband's business. She rewrote the company profile, redesigned the office, met with suppliers, and hosted private dinners for clients Thabiso could not afford to lose. She did not consider it giving up. She considered it partnership. Whenever Boy asked when she planned to return full-time, Refilwe always replied that she only needed a few more months. But a few months became 1 year, then 3. Molefi's signature continued to grow, while Refilwe's name appeared less and less frequently in the stories Thabiso told about his success. At first he said, "We built this company." Later he said, "I built this company with support from my family." Eventually, at luxurious business events, he would simply smile and say, "Refil likes to keep everything running smoothly at home." Each statement seemed small, but each one removed another piece of the truth. Refilwe still wore vibrant dresses, still stood beside her husband beneath the lights, and still smiled when guests called her fortunate wife. No one knew that she had designed the office they admired, selected the suppliers they relied on, and helped secure the first major contract that had kept the company alive. Even Thabiso appeared to have forgotten. One morning, while searching through an old box of documents from Moza Heritage Living, Refilwe found a small brass key shaped like a protea flower beneath several yellowing blueprints. It was a gift Boy had given her when they signed their first contract together. Refilwe closed her fingers around the key. She did not yet know which gate it would eventually open. But for the first time in years, she remembered that she had once possessed a door of her own. The grand hall overlooking Nelson Mandela Square glowed beneath crystal chandeliers arranged in concentric circles. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, Sandton's towers reflected the amber light of sunset. Inside, more than 100 guests raised sparkling fruit drinks while talking among bronze sculptures and sweeping fabrics in red, cobalt blue, and turmeric yellow. Refilwe entered wearing a long wine-red dress with indelible geometric patterns along the shoulders. The dress was elegant and striking without being excessive. She had chosen it because Thabiso once told her that red made her look like a woman who knew exactly where she was going. That evening, Refilwe was no longer certain her husband remembered ever saying those words. Molefi's signature was unveiling a new project for a luxury hotel group in Johannesburg. At the center of the stage stood a model of a hospitality space, combining natural stone, locally sourced wood, an indoor garden, and movable walls that could transform a conference room into an art gallery. The moment Refilwe saw the model, she stopped. She knew every curve. Several months earlier, Thabiso had complained that the client wanted something modern that still had a soul. Refilwe had taken a pencil and sketched an idea on the back of a restaurant menu. She proposed dividing the space with rotating partitions, using natural light to soften the cold atmosphere, and incorporating South African patterns into the materials rather than placing them on the surface as decoration. Thabiso had studied the sketch and kissed her forehead. "You always see what I cannot," he had said. Now that idea stood in the middle of the luxurious hall, presented as the newest achievement of Molefi's Signature's creative team. Her name was nowhere to be seen. Refilwe moved closer to the model. The dark wooden panels had been arranged exactly as they were in her original drawing. The semicircular garden had not changed. Even the strips of light running along the walkway matched the notes she had written in the margins. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice behind her made Refilwe turn. Naledi Ramogopa stood there in a bright coral women's suit, her hair styled in a neat bun and her thin gold earrings catching the light. At the time, Naledi had only recently been appointed Director of Customer Experience. She was intelligent, energetic, and frequently appeared beside Thabiso during important meetings. "It is beautiful," Refilwe replied. "Who developed the concept?" Naledi smiled, unaware that anything was wrong. "Thabiso brought the original direction to us, and then the creative team refined it. He said the idea came to him during a sleepless night." A sleepless night. Refilwe looked back at the model, feeling as though someone had quietly taken one of her memories and placed it beneath bright lights for other people to applaud. On stage, Thabiso appeared in a perfectly tailored navy suit. He spoke about identity, elegance, and the responsibility of bringing African design into luxurious spaces without reducing it to decoration. Those were Refilwe's words too. The guests listened attentively. Several raised their phones to record him. When Thabiso finished, applause filled the hall. Refilwe remained still. During the question and answer session, a female representative from the hotel group asked who had proposed the rotating walls and the central garden. Thabiso gestured toward the team standing below the stage. It is the result of the creative spirit at Molefi's signature, he said. I am fortunate to work with people who know how to transform my vision into reality. His eyes passed over Refilwe, only for a second. Then he turned toward Naledi and invited her to speak about the customer experience. Refilwe did not walk onto the stage and demand recognition. She had no desire to turn a business event into a marital argument, but her silence felt different this time. It was no longer surrender, it was observation. After the guests had left, Refilwe found Thabiso near the backstage area. He was unbuttoning his suit jacket, looking satisfied after a successful presentation. The concept you presented tonight came from my sketch, she said. Thabiso looked around before answering, as though what troubled him most was not her accusation, but the possibility that someone might overhear it. Refilwe, tonight was important. Do not start this here. I am not starting anything. I am asking why you did not mention my name, because it is no longer your sketch. The entire team developed it, but the foundation was mine. Thabiso sighed and placed both hands on his hips. It was only a few lines on a piece of paper, Refilwe. You gave your husband an idea. Since when does everything between a husband and wife require an invoice and an ownership claim? The words silenced her, not because she had no answer, but because, for the first time, she clearly understood how Thabiso viewed everything she contributed. When her work helped him succeed, it was called a wife's support. When she asked to be acknowledged, it was immediately treated as pettiness. I am not asking for money, Refilwe said slowly. I simply do not want to be erased from something I created. Thabiso shook his head. This is exactly why I did not want you returning to work so seriously. You are beginning to turn everything into a competition. He walked away before she could answer. Refilwe stood alone as the staff began dismantling the room. The vibrant fabrics were lowered. One by one, the velvet chairs were stacked, and the architectural model was covered with a white cloth. She did not cry on the drive home. She thought about the old box of documents, the contracts bearing the name Mosa Heritage Living, and the brass Protea-shaped key resting inside her desk drawer. When she entered her private study, Refilwe picked up her phone and called Boy Pello. Boy answered after several rings. So you finally remember that you still own a company? She asked, half joking and half serious. Refilwe looked through the glass window at the lights of Sandton stretching beneath the dark sky. I want to come back, she said. Not to make a few drawings whenever I have free time. I want to return properly. Boy remained silent for several seconds. Then there is something you should know, she replied. The old property in Rivonia has just been approved for redevelopment. Refilwe tightened her grip on the phone. The door she had believed was closed years ago had just made the first sound of unlocking. Refilwe stood before the rusted gates of an abandoned conference property in Rivonia. Weeds had grown through the cracked driveway, several windows were broken, and faded paint peeled from the walls in long strips. Behind the main building stood 6 smaller guest houses, all of them neglected after years, without proper maintenance. Boy parked beside her and stepped out wearing a mustard yellow jacket over dark work trousers. She carried a tablet, a measuring device, and a folder thick with municipal documents. Still want to come back? Boy asked. Refilwe looked beyond the damaged entrance. Yes, you have not even seen the repair estimate. I have seen enough to know the structure can be saved. Boy raised an eyebrow. That sounds exactly like something your father would say. Refilwe smiled faintly. Her father had spent most of his life repairing buildings other people believed were no longer worth saving. He taught her to distinguish between a damaged surface and a failed foundation. Paint could peel, windows could break, a roof could leak for years. None of those things automatically meant a building had reached the end of its life. The two women walked through the main entrance. Dust covered the reception desk, and the air carried the smell of old wood and damp plaster. A large conference hall occupied the center of the building, with high ceilings and glass doors opening toward an overgrown garden. Refilwe slowly crossed the room. She did not see broken chairs or stained walls. She saw a shared studio where architects, engineers, and artisans could work. She saw movable partitions dividing the hall into training rooms. She imagined exhibitions featuring local designers and weekend workshops for women returning to professional careers after years away from the workplace. Behind the conference hall, the former guest houses could become private homes, not temporary accommodation. Real homes. What if we do not sell the units? Refilwe asked. Boy looked up from her tablet. Then how do we recover the development costs? We lease them long-term to professional women who need secure housing near Sandton. Architects, consultants, engineers, business owners. Women who can afford rent but do not necessarily want to purchase property immediately. That will take longer to generate returns. I know. Investors will ask why we are not converting the entire site into luxury residences and selling them as quickly as possible, because Sandton already has enough expensive buildings with no sense of belonging. Boy studied her friend's face. This is not just a property project, is it? Refilwe walked toward the glass doors and pushed one open. Outside, thorny bushes had swallowed most of the garden, but a few Protea plants still survived near the stone wall. No, she said. It is a place where a woman should be able to close her door and know that no one can use housing to control her choices. Boy did not ask what had happened inside Refilwe's marriage. She knew enough to understand that some ideas were born from wounds people were not yet ready to describe. They spent the morning inspecting every part of the property. The roof above eastern wing required urgent reinforcement. Drainage around the guest houses had failed, causing moisture damage along several foundations. The electrical system needed replacement, and the municipality required improved emergency access before approving public use of the studio. The numbers became more difficult with every room they entered. Refilwe did not look away. By the time they sat beneath a jacaranda tree near the rear boundary, Boy had produced an initial estimate that was far higher than Moza Heritage Living's available funds. We can complete it in stages, Refilwe said. We still need enough capital to purchase the property and make the first section legally habitable. Refilwe opened the financial folder she had brought from home. Her ownership stake in Moza Heritage Living had existed before her marriage. Although she had stepped away from daily operations, she had continued receiving dividends from several restoration projects managed by Boy. She also had income from private design work. It was not enough. Refilwe then mentioned the apartment she had purchased before marrying Thabiso. It had been rented out for years, and its value had risen considerably as Sandton expanded. Boy immediately shook her head. You should not sell your only separate residential asset. I would be exchanging one apartment for a stake in an entire development. You would also be taking on a bank loan, a loan secured by a project with a phased revenue plan, and if the project fails. Refilwe looked back at the abandoned buildings. Then I will accept responsibility for that failure. But I will not continue protecting myself so carefully that I never build anything again. It was not a romantic decision. There was no mysterious billionaire offering to fund her dream. No hidden inheritance appeared in her account. Refilwe and Boy spent weeks preparing financial projections, obtaining structural reports, negotiating with contractors, and documenting the origin of every portion of the proposed investment. Refilwe sold the apartment she had purchased before her marriage. She invested part of her accumulated Moza dividends. The company contributed retained profits from previous projects, while the remaining cost would depend on a commercial bank loan. Their first application was rejected. The bank considered the long-term housing model too uncertain and questioned whether 6 rental units, a design studio, and a conference space could generate enough income to service the debt. The loan officers had suggested they convert the property into conventional luxury homes for immediate sale. Refilwe refused to abandon the original purpose. Instead, she revised the plan. The main building would be restored first, along with 2 residential units. Income from the studio and early leases would support the following phase. Imported materials were removed from the budget and replaced with stone, timber, textiles, and furniture produced by South African suppliers. Several contractors agreed to stagger payments because Moza Heritage Living had worked reliably with them before. When Refilwe and Boy returned to the bank, the proposal was stronger. It was still not approved. The credit committee required evidence that at least one professional tenant was prepared to sign a long-term lease before construction began. Without that commitment, the bank would not release the funds. Outside the bank, Boy leaned against the car and released a frustrated breath. We have a property agreement, municipal approval, cost estimates, and a phased construction plan. Now they want someone to promise to live in a house that has not yet been repaired. They want proof that the idea exists outside our imagination, Refilwe said. And where are we supposed to find a tenant willing to sign before seeing a finished unit? Refilwe opened the architectural drawings across the hood of the car. At the center of the plan, she had drawn the restored garden and marked the surviving flowers near the old stone wall. Protea Ridge, that was the name she had chosen. The Protea was not delicate. It survived difficult soil, fire, and changing seasons, then returned with a shape strong enough to be mistaken for armor. Refilwe traced the entrance with her finger. We do not need to convince everyone, she said. We only need to find the first woman who understands what this place can become. The bank had not yet given them the money. Construction had not begun. But Protea Ridge was no longer merely an abandoned property in Rivonia. It had a name, a purpose, and 2 women willing to build it without pretending the road ahead would be easy. Now they needed someone else to believe that it could become a home. Refilwe entered the offices of Molefi's signature, carrying a leather folder against her chest. Inside it was the signed letter of intent from Protea Ridge's first prospective tenant, a senior engineering consultant who had agreed to lease one of the restored homes once the first phase was completed. It was not yet a final contract, but it was enough to bring the bank back to the table. The executive floor was unusually quiet. Most employees had already left, and the lights inside several offices had been switched off. Beyond the glass walls, Sandton's towers glowed against the evening sky. Refilwe walked toward Thabiso's office, intending to tell him about the progress before he heard it from someone else. She stopped when she reached the boardroom. Through the partially open door, she saw Naledi standing beside the long glass table in a fitted coral suit. Thabiso was in front of her, holding a small box cap in dark velvet. When he opened it, a thin gold bracelet caught the light. Naledi smiled. You did not have to buy me this, she said. You earned it, Thabiso replied. The hotel launch would not have succeeded without you. Refilwe remained still outside the room. It was not merely the bracelet that disturbed her. It was the softness in Thabiso's voice. She remembered hearing that same tone years earlier, when he used to tell her that her designs made his companies different from every other events business in Sandton. Naledi reached toward the bracelet. Then she saw Refilwe standing in the doorway. Her smile disappeared. Thabiso turned around. For one brief second, guilt crossed his face. Then his expression changed into irritation, as though Refilwe had interrupted an ordinary business discussion. What are you doing here? He asked. I came to show you something. Refilwe looked at the bracelet before meeting his eyes. Thabiso closed the velvet box. It is an employee reward, he said. Naledi led the customer experience team through a difficult launch. I did not ask what it was. Naledi lowered her hand. I should leave, she said. No, Thabiso replied quickly. There is nothing improper happening here. Refilwe stepped into the boardroom and placed her folder on the table. I never said there was. The silence that followed made the room feel smaller. Naledi picked up her handbag and left without looking directly at Refilwe. Her heels echoed along the corridor until the sound disappeared behind the elevator doors. Thabis loosened his tie. You should have called before coming. I am your wife. I did not realize I needed an appointment to enter your office. You know that is not what I meant. Refilwe opened the folder and slid the letter across the table. We found our first prospective tenant for Protea Ridge. She is prepared to sign a long-term lease once the bank releases the first construction payment. Thabiso barely glanced at the document. So the old property project still going ahead? It is not an old property project. It is a residential and professional development. You sold your apartment for this, did you not? Refilwe looked at him carefully. How do you know that? The bank contacted the household address to confirm some information. You should have told me before selling property while we are married. The apartment belonged to me before our marriage. The sale was reviewed by my lawyer and accountant. Thabiso laughed without humor. So now you have a lawyer for decisions you hide from your husband. I have professionals reviewing a business transaction. That is responsible, not secretive. He pushed the letter back toward her. Refilwe, you are treating this project as though it will become some major property empire. It is 6 damaged guest houses and an abandoned conference center. It is more than you have bothered to understand. I understand enough to know you are risking your savings because you want to prove something. She closed the folder slowly. I wanted to share good news with you, then share it without expecting me to pretend this is bigger than it is. Refilwe studied the man standing across from her. Years earlier, Thabiso had listened when she explained drainage materials and community design. Now he dismissed a fully documented development plan without reading a single page. The problem was not that he disagreed with her. The problem was that he had already decided her work did not deserve attention. Refilwe gathered the documents. As she turned to leave, she noticed a printed expense report near the edge of the table. It was part of a finance package waiting for Thabiso's approval. Refilwe recognized the format because she had helped create Molfi Signature's early budgeting system. One down payment descriptions caught her attention. Client experience accommodation. The amount had been paid to a serviced apartment in Sandton. A second entry covered a weekend trip described as executive relationship development. Another listed a jewelry supplier under brand ambassador appreciation. Refilwe did not take the document. She only read what was visible in front of her. Why is the company paying for a serviced apartment? She asked. Thabiso immediately placed his hand over the report. It is for visiting consultants. And the jewelry? Marketing expenses. The bracelet just gave Naledi came from the same supplier. His expression hardened. You are searching for a scandal because you are angry that I did not celebrate your little project. Refilwe did not raise her voice. I am asking a financial question. It is none of your business. I helped build the controls that govern this company. You helped years ago. That does not give you the right to inspect my accounts whenever you feel insecure. The word struck her with more force than his anger. Insecure. That was how Thabiso now described every moment when Refilwe noticed something he did not want explained. She left the boardroom without arguing further. The following day, a financial report from Molefe Signature arrived in the shared household records, just as similar documents had for years. Refilwe did not hack an account, open private correspondence, or remove anything from the office. She reviewed information that had been legally sent to an address and email account she was authorized to access. The report revealed 6 payments connected to Naledi. There was the serviced apartment, 2 travel expenses, the bracelet and consulting fees paid to a recently registered company called Ramogopa Client Solutions. The company's listed business address matched Naledi's residential address. Some payments might have been legitimate, but there were no detailed work reports attached. Refilwe made copies and recorded the date on which each document had been received. She did not confront Naledi. She did not post accusations online or call Thabiso's board members. Instead, she contacted Lindiwe Maseko, an attorney who specialized in family businesses, intellectual property, and mediation. They met in a private office overlooking Sandton. Lindiwe read the documents without making dramatic conclusions. This does not prove everything, she said. A company may legally pay an employee's accommodation, travel, incentives out consulting business. But the transactions must have a legitimate purpose, proper authorization, and documentation. What if the personal relationship influenced the payments? Then it may become a corporate governance issue, not merely a marital one. Refilwe rested her hands in her lap. I do not want revenge. Good, Lindiwe replied. Revenge usually makes people careless. What do you want? The truth. I want to know what belongs to the marriage, what belongs to the company, and what responsibilities Thabiso may have violated. Lindiwe closed the folder. Then do not accuse anyone yet. Preserve every document exactly as you received it. Keep your finances separate where legally appropriate. Do not sign anything Thabiso gives you without independent advice. Refilwe nodded. Should I tell him I spoke to you? You are not required to announce that you sought legal advice. But understand this clearly. Preparing yourself is not the same as secretly planning to destroy your marriage. On the drive back to Protea Ridge, Refilwe thought about those words. For years, she had believed that protecting the marriage meant absorbing every uncomfortable truth until she could make it disappear. But silence had not protected anything. It had only allowed Thabiso to control the story. At the construction site, Boy was waiting beside the first residential unit. The bank accepted the tenant letter, she said. They are releasing the first portion of the loan. Refilwe looked at the unfinished house, the exposed beams, and the workers measuring the window frames. For the first time, Protea Ridge had enough funding to begin. At the same time, the documents in her bag suggested that another structure, one she had spent years helping to hold together, might already be failing from within. Refilwe placed her hand over the folder. The truth was no longer limited to her marriage. It had entered the company accounts. Ziktingen 5 Sak Tinga Mamfo Molefi raised her crystal glass beneath the warm lights of her formal dining room and smiled proudly at her son. To Thabiso, she said, a man who built his success with discipline, courage, and his own 2 hands. The guests around the long dining table lifted their glasses. Mamfo's home in Sandton had been decorated for the family dinner with white Protea flowers, gold candle holders, and deep blue Tswana fabrics. Every plate had been arranged perfectly, and every person had been seated according to the careful order Mamamfo preferred. Refilwe sat beside her husband in a flowing yellow dress, trimmed with turquoise indebele patterns. She smiled politely as everyone praised Thabiso's latest hotel contract. No one mentioned the woman who had helped design the proposal. No one mentioned the office Refilwe had created, the clients she had helped retain, or the years she had stepped away from Mosa Heritage Living to support Molefi's signature. Thabiso accepted the praise as though the story were complete. You have always known how to lead, Mamamfo continued. Even when things were difficult, you never allowed your family to see you struggling. Refilwe lowered her glass. She remembered the months when Thabiso's company had nearly collapsed. She remembered rewriting proposals after midnight, negotiating payment schedules with suppliers, and hosting clients in their home because the company could not afford to lose them. Thabiso had struggled. He had simply not struggled alone. Mamamfo turned toward Refilwe. And of course, a successful man needs peace at home. Refilwe has always been fortunate enough to focus on making sure everything runs smoothly. Several relatives nodded. Refilwe felt Thabiso's hand touch her knee beneath the table. The gesture appeared affectionate, but she understood it as a warning. Do not correct my mother. Do not make this uncomfortable. Do not disturb the story everyone prefers. Refilwe gently moved her leg away. Mamfo continued speaking. I hear you are becoming busy with an old property project in Rivonia. That is good as a personal interest, but a married woman should be careful not to become so consumed by outside ambitions that she neglects what truly matters. The room grew quieter. Refilwe placed her fork beside her plate. Protea Ridge is not a personal interest, she said. It is a registered development under Mosa Heritage Living. Mamfo smiled as though correcting a child. I did not mean to insult you. I only mean that a woman must understand where her greatest responsibility lies. And where do you believe that is? Within her family. Refilwe looked around the table. Several guests avoided her eyes. Others waited with the uncomfortable curiosity of people who sensed that a private truth was about to enter a public room. I agree that family is a responsibility, Refilwe said. But responsibility cannot belong to only one person. Thabiso's jaw tightened. He said quietly, "She did not raise her voice. For years, I helped build Molefi's signature. I redesigned its offices, worked with its suppliers, supported its clients, and stepped away from my own company when Thabiso needed me. I did those things because I believed we were partners." Mamfo's expression hardened. "No one forced you. That is true. I chose to help my husband, but a voluntary sacrifice does not become worthless simply because no one forced it." The words settled heavily over the table. Thabiso leaned back in his chair. "Must we discuss business at a family dinner? You are discussing your success," Refilwe replied. "I am only adding the part of story that was left out." Mamafo placed her glass down. "A wise wife does not count everything she has done for her husband. A wise husband should not make it necessary for her to count." Our relative near the far end of the table looked down to hide a reaction. Someone else cleared his throat. Mamfo stared at Refilwe. "You have changed." Refilwe had heard the same accusation from Thabiso. What they meant was that she had stopped making herself easy to overlook. "I am speaking more clearly," she said. "That is not the same as changing." Mamfo folded her hands. "Marriage survives because women know when to remain silent." Refil looked directly at her. "No. Marriage survives when both people are allowed to speak without one person's honesty being treated as disrespect." Thabiso pushed his chair back slightly. "That is enough." Refil turned toward him. "Why?" "Because you are embarrassing me in front of my family. You were comfortable while they praised you for work we did together. You only became embarrassed when I told the truth. This is not the place. There is never a place when the truth makes you uncomfortable." The silence around them was no longer peaceful. It was exposed. For years, Refilwe had mistaken quietness for dignity. She had believed that protecting Thabiso from embarrassment was part of protecting their marriage. But every time she remained silent, the story changed a little more. Her contribution became support. Her career became a hobby. Her patience became proof that she agreed with everything being said. Mampamfo lifted her chin. "You should be grateful for the life my son has given you." Refil felt something inside her become completely still. "The life I have," she replied, "was not given to me by one man." Thabiso stood. "We are leaving." Refilwe did not argue. She rose, thanked the staff who had served dinner, and collected her handbag. She did not apologize to the guests or soften what she had said. During the drive home, Thabiso remained silent until they entered the villa. The moment the front door closed, he turned toward her. "What exactly were you trying to prove? That I existed before I became your wife? You humiliated my mother. Your mother reduced my work to a distraction and my marriage to an obligation to remain silent. She comes from a different generation." That explains her beliefs. "It does not require me to live by them." Thabiso removed his jacket and threw it onto the sofa. "Ever since you started working on Protea Ridge, you have become impossible." "Protea Ridge did not make me impossible." "Then what did it do?" "It reminded me who I was before everyone became comfortable, pretending I had no life of my own." Thabiso laughed bitterly. "So this is about independence now?" "No, it is about respect. You have a home, financial security, and a husband who provides for you. What more respect do you need?" Refilwe looked at him carefully. The question told her more than any confession could have. Thabiso believed that providing a house and a lifestyle gave him the right to define her value. In his mind, material comfort should have purchased her silence. Refilwe walked upstairs to their bedroom. She sat before the dressing table and slowly removed her wedding ring. She did not throw it away. She placed it inside a small velvet box and closed the lid. She was not yet deciding to end the marriage, but she was finally allowing herself to ask what she would need if Thabiso never changed. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Boy. Protea Ridge's largest private investor had withdrawn, unless they found another source of funding. Construction would have to stop within 3 weeks. Refilwe read the message twice. Downstairs, Thabiso poured himself a drink. still convinced that the greatest threat to their marriage was his wife's refusal to remain quiet. He did not know that Refilwe was about to source choice between protecting the last of personal security and saving the project that represented her future. At 10 a.m., Refilwe stood inside the first model room at Protea Ridge, where sunlight poured through the dark glass windows and fell across the wooden floor, still carrying the fresh scent of protective oil. The cream-colored walls were accented with geometric lines in turquoise, turmeric yellow, and earth red. Beyond the window was the newly planted Protea garden, still small but already bringing life back to the property that had once been abandoned. Refilwe wore an ivory women's suit over burnt orange silk blouse. Her hair was braided neatly away from her face, and her high heels rested beside the door because she wanted to inspect every joint in the flooring herself. The room was not perfect. One glass pass panel still needed to be replaced with the correct size. Two recessed lights were missing, and the paint near the balcony door had to be redone. But for the first time since returning to Mosa Heritage Living, Refilwe could step into a space that had once existed only on paper. Boy stood beside the window, holding her tablet and trying to hide her concern. "Do you want the good news first?" she asked. "No, give me the bad news. The investor has sent formal notice. They are withdrawing the rest of their funding at the end of the month." Refilwe bent down to inspect the seam between two wooden panels. Why? They believe the long-term housing model for professional women will not generate returns quickly enough. They want us to sell each residence at a premium as soon as it is completed. Refilwe stood upright. We explained that rental income, the training studio, and the conference space would support one another. They understand. They simply do not want to wait. It was something Refilwe had encountered too many times in the property development world. People like talking about sustainable value until a faster profit appeared. Protea Ridge had been designed to create a community, but in the eyes of many investors, each door was merely another product that could be sold. Refilwe walked toward the glass doors and looked down at the garden. "How much do we have left?" Boy opened the financial report. After paying the contractors, design fees, material costs, and loan interest, Mosa had enough money to keep the construction site operating for only a few more weeks. Without new funding, they would have to suspend the work. That would not only delay the opening, but also increase costs, risk losing their first tenant, and cause the bank to review the entire loan agreement. "There is one option," Boy said. "We sell the main residence." Refilwe turned around. The main residence was the most valuable part of Protea Ridge. It was also where she intended to establish the design office, exhibition area, and her private apartment. If they sold it to an individual buyer, Mosa could finish the 6 smaller homes, reduce its debt, and protect the company. It was a reasonable choice, but it would change the soul of the project. "What does the buyer want?" Refilwe asked. "A private estate. They would build a separate wall, close the path through the garden, and refuse to share the conference space. Then the remaining houses would become a collection of homes standing beside a mansion without truly belonging to the same community." Boy did not deny it. "At least we would save the company." Refilwe walked slowly across the model room. She remembered the first day she had stood among the weeds, when the cracked walls, the prosperity looked like something everyone else had abandoned. She had not returned to her career merely to create an expensive home for the person capable of paying the highest price. But responsibility was not only about protecting an ideal. It also meant paying the people doing the work, honoring commitments to tenants, and refusing to place Boye and the entire team in financial danger because of personal pride. "Show me every possible option," Refilwe said. The two women sat at the only wooden table in the room. They removed the infinity pool from the plans, replaced imported stone with locally sourced material, delayed the completion of one row of homes, and moved several decorative features into a later phase. Refilwe suggested opening the studio early so it could be rented for weekend workshops. Boye recalculated the budget several times. They were still short. Refilwe looked at the figures on the screen, then thought about an asset she had never intended to touch: the dividends being held in Mosa's separate investment account. She had planned to use that money as a personal safety net in case her marriage ended before Protea Ridge began generating income. If she used it, the project could continue, but she would lose her final layer of security. No, Boyce said as soon as she understood what her friend was considering. You already sold your apartments. You cannot keep putting everything you own into this. Not everything, almost everything. Refilwe placed both hands on the table. Boy, I do not want to preserve a safety fund by allowing 30 people on this construction site to lose their jobs, but I also refuse to act emotionally. Call Lindiwe and the accountant. We will use the dividends only if both confirm that doing so will not affect my personal obligations or create legal risks. Boy studied her for a long moment before nodding. That was the difference between the Refilwe of the present and the woman who had once silently sacrificed everything to rescue her husband's company. This time she was not rushing to solve the problem alone. She was asking for figures, boundaries, and shared responsibility. By the end of the day, the new plan had been approved. Hadi. The dividends would keep the construction site operating for only 3 additional months, but those 3 months might be enough to generate the project's first income. Boy took a small wooden box from her bag. I plan to wait until the opening ceremony, she said. But perhaps you need this today. Inside was a new brass key shaped like a protea flower. Unlike the old key, which had carried only symbolic meaning, this one truly opened the model room and the main residence. Refilwe held it in her palm. You are giving me a key when we are nearly out of money? Boy smiled. I am giving it to you because you just proved that you are not building this place to escape from a man. You are building it for something greater. Refilwe walked toward the entrance, placed the key in the lock, and opened the model room once again. Light spread across the new walls, the Protea garden, and the unfinished path beyond it. She had chosen not to sell the soul of the project, but that choice meant Protea Ridge now had only 3 months to prove that it could survive. Just as Refilwe prepared to lock the door, Boy's phone rang. A professional development organization for women wanted to lease the entire studio for 6 months. They were prepared to sign a contract. But before Boy could celebrate, she read the final condition and looked at Refilwe. The organization required the owner of Protea Ridge to appear personally at the public announcement. That meant Refilwe could no longer keep the project outside Thabiso's site. Refilwe entered the living room of the Molefe villa in Sandton and saw a cream-colored suitcase standing beneath the crystal chandelier. Beside it were 2 bags of her clothes that the housekeeper had brought down from the bedroom. Thabiso stood in front of the glass doors wearing a dark navy suit, while Naledi sat on the sofa in a coral suit that stood out sharply against the ivory room. No one invited Refilwe to sit down. The public announcement at Protea Ridge had ended less than an hour earlier. In front of business representatives, architects, and members of professional development organization, Refilwe had been introduced as the co-founder of Mosa Heritage Living, the lead architect and the majority owner of the development. Images of her standing before the main residence in a turmeric yellow dress with ndebele trim had already appeared on local business news pages. Thabiso had discovered the truth in the way he hated most, not from his wife, from people congratulating her. I called you 12 times, Thabiso said. I was working. You allowed me to discover through a news article that my wife owns a property development in Rivonia. I told you about the project. You said it was an old property being renovated. You did not say you owned it. Refilwe placed her handbag on the table. She looked toward Naledi, but the other woman avoided her eyes. The gold bracelet Refilwe had seen in the office was now around Naledi's wrist. Why is she here? Refilwe asked. Thabiso stepped closer to Naledi, as though that movement alone were enough to answer the question. I do not want to keep pretending. Are you talking about our marriage or the company funds that were transferred to her business? Naledi raised her head sharply. Thabiso hesitated, but only for a moment. Do not bring company matters into this house. You brought company money into a serviced apartment 2 private trips, and a consulting business with no reports detailed enough to justify the payments. You are the one who mixed the 2 matters together. Naledi turned toward Thabiso. You told me those payments had been approved by the board. This is not the time, he replied coldly. Refilwe understood immediately that Naledi did not know the full truth. Thabiso had told her that his marriage existed only on paper, that Protea Ridge was a failing personal hobby, and that every company expense was legitimate. He had created 2 versions of his life and given each woman just enough information to prevent her from asking deeper questions. But Naledi's ignorance did not make her completely innocent. She had known he was married. Thabiso pointed toward the suitcase. You are leaving tonight. I will instruct the lawyers to prepare the divorce papers. Naledi is moving in, and I do not want an ugly scene in front of the staff. Refil looked at the suitcase, then at the walls whose color she had selected, the sofa she had commissioned, and the bronze sculpture she had purchased during one of their anniversary trips. The house held countless traces of her, but its ownership had belonged to the Molefi family trust before the marriage. Thabiso had always treated that fact as power. You packed my belongings? She asked. The essential things, the rest can be sent later. And you believe you have the right to decide what is essential to me? This house was paid for with my family's money, Refilwe. Do not turn tonight into a performance. Years earlier, those words might have frightened her. Whenever Thabiso mentioned money, Thabiso Miti, Refilwe used to think about everything she had sacrificed, whether she could survive if she had to begin again. Tonight, she saw only a man using the last door he controlled to make her feel small. Refilwe opened her handbag, removed the brass key shaped like a protea flower, and placed it in her palm. Are you certain this is the only home I can walk into? Thabiso laughed, but the sound lacked confidence. Protea Ridge is a debt-funded project. Do not stand there pretending you built a palace. No, Refilwe said. I built a development with income, signed leases, audited records, and clear ownership documents. Those are things you never ask about because you believed my work was not worth listening to. Thabiso tightened his jaw. So you have been planning to leave me for a long time. No, I planned to make sure I would not be trapped if you continued choosing dishonesty. Naledi stood. Thabiso, you told me she had agreed to a separation. Refilwe looked directly at her. I never agreed. I simply stopped arguing with a man who no longer told the truth. Do not listen to her, Thabiso said. She is trying to make you feel guilty. No, Refilwe replied. Guilt is something each person must confront for herself. I am only stating the truth. She walked toward the suitcase but did not open it. Instead, Refilwe went upstairs to the study and collected the box containing her personal documents, her computer, and a small bag of clothing. She did not take decorations, jointly owned jewelry, or anything that might later create a dispute. When she returned downstairs, Naledi was standing beside Thabiso's desk. Her eyes had settled on an envelope bearing the name of an independent auditing firm. Written across the front were the words, Molefi signature, along with a formal instruction to preserve all documents connected to Naledi's consulting company. The color drained from Naledi's face. Thabiso immediately picked up the envelope. This does not concern you. The company carries my name, Naledi said. Of course it concerns me. Refilwe pulled the cream suitcase away from her feet and placed it upright beside the sofa. This suitcase can remain here, she said. I already prepared what I need. Thabiso looked at the small bag in her hand, and the confidence in his expression began to fracture. Where are you going? Refilwe closed her fingers around the brass key. To a place where no one can use money to decide whether I am allowed to stay. She walked out without looking back. Behind her, Naledi began asking rapid questions about the invoices, while Thabiso repeatedly ordered her to be quiet. Refilwe felt no sense of victory. She felt only that her marriage had finally spoken aloud what it had been proving in silence for years. When the door closed behind her, she placed the Protea-shaped key on the passenger seat and started the car. That night, Thabiso believed he had thrown his wife out of his home. He had no idea that the gate waiting ahead of Refilwe would open into a life in which his name had never appeared. Refilwe's car stopped before the tall steel gates of Protea Ridge. The morning sun cast a pale golden glow over Rivonia, reflecting across the large glass panels of the main residence. 2 rows of Protea flowers lined the entrance, still covered in dew, their reddish-pink petals standing out against the grey stone and dark green indigenous shrubs. Refilwe remained seated behind the steering wheel. The brass key, shaped like a Protea flower, rested in the center of her palm. Only a few hours earlier, Thabiso had placed a suitcase at her feet and believed he could decide where she was allowed to live. Now, before Refilwe stood a property she had spent years designing, financing, restoring, and protecting from people who wanted to divide it into pieces for a quick profit. She entered the security code. The gates opened to both sides. There was no triumphant music. No one stood waiting to applaud her. There was only the quiet sound of the gate motor, the tires rolling over the stone driveway, and the breathing of a woman finally entering a place that carried her own imprint. Refilwe parked in front of the main residence. She stepped out wearing the long turquoise dress from the previous evening, with a cream cotal coat over it. The outfit was still elegant, but several wrinkles had formed after a sleepless night. She retrieved her small bag, document box, and computer from the back seat, then climbed the wide stone steps. The key turned in the lock. The door opened into a high-ceilinged foyer with ivory walls and a gently curved wooden staircase leading to the upper floor. Swana textiles in yellow, red, and cobalt blue hung between sections of stone wall. At the end of the hallway, glass doors looked directly onto the Protea garden, now welcoming the morning sunlight. Refilwe placed her bag down. She had imagined this moment would make her feel powerful. But standing inside the spacious residence, the first thing she felt was exhaustion. Her shoulders began to shake. Refilwe placed one hand on the stone table in the center of the foyer and lowered her head. The tears did not fall because she wanted it to return to Thabiso. She cried for the woman who had spent years sitting through elegant dinners while her work was retold as someone else's achievement. She cried for the version of herself who had been beloved that if she remained patient long enough, a man would eventually remember how to respect his wife. She cried because she had finally stopped waiting. A short while later, the sound of a small delivery truck came from outside the gates. Boy arrived with 3 members of the Moza Heritage Living team. They carried boxes of documents, curtains for the studio, and potted plants that needed to be placed before the opening. Boy stepped inside, saw the single bag beside her friend's feet, and immediately understood. "You do not have to tell me now," she said. Refilwe wiped her face. "He brought Naledi into our home." Boy tightened her grip on the handle of her bag, but she did not insult either of them. "Do you want to be alone?" Refilwe looked around the foyer. "No, I want to work." It was not her way of avoiding the pain. The work that morning had already been planned, and Refilwe refused it to allow Thabiso's betrayal to take anything else that belonged to her. The team began completing the main residence. Earth-red curtains were hung, bronze sculptures were placed in their proper positions, and furniture crafted by local artisans was moved into the living room. Within a few hours, the residence looked less like a model property and began to carry the warmth of a place where someone truly lived. Refilwe was inspecting the lighting system when the security officer called from the entrance. Thabiso was outside. He had arrived in the company's black car, still wearing the dark suit from the previous night. When he stepped out, he stared at the main residence, the 6 smaller homes, and the studio behind them with open disbelief. On the stone sign beside the gates were the words Protea Ridge. A Moza Heritage Living Development. Refilwe walked outside to meet him, but she did not open the gates. "You really live here?" Thabiso asked. "This is my legal residence, and it is also the project headquarters." "You built all of this behind my back?" "No, I built it in front of you. You simply never cared enough to look." Thabiso moved closer to the fence. "We are married. This property may belong to both of us." Refilwe passed a folder through the gate's document slot. Inside were the records proving that Moza Heritage Living had been established before the marriage. The business loan agreements, capital source reports, documents from the sale of her separately owned apartment, and confirmation that no joint account had been used. I had every transaction reviewed by my lawyer and accountant, she said. My ownership stake was funded through assets I owned before a half-marriage, company dividends, and income from my independent design work. I did not take your money. Thabiso quickly flipped through the pages. Why did you prepare everything this carefully? Because I knew that one day you would ask who owned my property before asking what I had sacrificed to create it. He looked up, his face tense. You deceived me. Refilwe kept her voice calm. I did not hide anything from a husband who knew how to listen. I simply stopped explaining myself to a man who had already decided that my work was not worth his attention. Thabiso looked over her shoulder toward the residence. Boy and the rest of the team continued working. No one stopped to watch the confrontation as though it were a performance. We need to speak face to face, he said. Open the gate. No just one word. Thabiso froze, perhaps because in all their years together, he had never heard Refilwe refuse him so simply. All further communications concerning the marriage, property, and businesses will go through the lawyers, she said. Your use of company funds for Nelady will be handled by the auditors. I will not argue with you at the gates of a place I built. You are trying to destroy me. I did not approve those invoices. I did not bring Naledi into our home either. Consequences do not become my creation simply because I refuse to hide them. Refilwe turned and walked back toward the residence. Behind her, Thabiso called his wife's name once more, but she did not stop. The steel gate slowly closed, leaving him outside with the folder in his hands. Refilwe returned to the foyer, picked up her small bag, and carried it into the room overlooking the garden. On the table beside the window, she placed the brass Protea-shaped key inside a blue ceramic bowl. She did not feel victorious. She only felt safe. At that moment, Boy entered with her phone in her hand. The auditing firm had just sent an urgent notice. Naledi had agreed to provide every email and document connected to the payments made by Molefe's signature. One of the emails showed that Thabiso had not merely concealed the affair. He had also planned to transfer another large sum of money into Nedi's company before the end of the financial year. The lights lining the paths of Protea Ridge came on all at once, casting a warm golden glow across the stone wall, glass doors, and Protea garden now in full bloom. Guests dressed in cobalt blue, earth red, plum purple, and turmeric yellow stood talking around the newly completed studio. On the small stage was a sign bearing the name Protea Women in Design Fellowship. Refilwe stood beside Boy in a long ivory white dress, its shoulders decorated with orange and turquoise endeble patterns. The brass key shaped like a protea flower hung from a delicate chain around her neck. 6 months had passed since the gates of Protea Ridge closed in front of Thabiso. During that time, the truth had not exploded into a scandal filled with shouting. It had been revealed layer by layer in private boardrooms, bank statements, and meetings with lawyers. Naledi had surrendered every email, contract, and invoice connected to the consulting company registered in her name. She admitted that she knew Thabiso was still married, but insisted that he had told her Refilwe had agreed to a separation and was only waiting for the paperwork to be completed. She had also believed that the payments made to her business had been approved by the board. Some of the services Naledi provided were legitimate, but the amount transferred to her company far exceeded the value of the work. The audit discovered that Thabiso had used the marketing budget to pay for the serviced apartment, 2 vacations, and the gold bracelet. He had also planned to transfer another large sum into Naledi's company before end of the financial year, even though there was no new contract to justify the payment. The board did not dismiss him immediately. Thabiso was the founder of Molefe Signature, and many clients still trusted his professional abilities. However, he was forced to step away temporarily from executive leadership, repay every improperly used expense, and accept oversight from an independent chief financial officer during the company's restructuring. It was not destruction, it was accountability. Naledi resigned. She was neither portrayed as completely innocent nor publicly humiliated. During her final meeting with the auditors, she admitted that she had chosen to believe the version of the story that benefited her most because it allowed her to have what she wanted. "He lied to me," she told Refilwe after a mediation session. "But I also failed to ask the questions a responsible woman should have asked." Refilwe did not comfort her, nor did she insult her. "You do not need my forgiveness to begin living more honestly," Refilwe replied. "But you do need to understand that another woman paid the price for your choices." Naledi nodded and walked away. The divorce between Refilwe and Thabiso was resolved through mediation. Lindiwe did not promise that infidelity would cause Thabiso to lose everything because the law did not operate like an act of revenge. The old villa remained part of the Molefi family trust. Protea Ridge and Refilwe's ownership stake in Moza Heritage Living were protected by the company's premarital formation records, her separate sources of funding, and clear audit reports. They divided the remaining joint assets according to their settlement. Thabiso kept the company after its restructuring. Refilwe kept her freedom. During the final signing, Thabiso sat across from her, looking far more exhausted than the man who had once kicked a suitcase toward his wife. He was not wearing one of his usual expensive suits. Instead, he wore a pale blue shirt without a tie. "I thought you needed me," he said. Refilwe closed her pen. "I once needed a husband, but you confused that with believing I could not survive without you." Thabiso lowered his head. "I am sorry." She looked at him for a long time. "I believe you regret what you did, but regret does not erase the years in which it happened. Is there any chance for us? There is a chance for you to become a better man. But there is no longer a chance for you to be my husband." Refilwe did not say it in anger. She said it with clarity. Now, as the forming ceremony for the Protea Women in Design Fellowship began, Refilwe looked at the adult women gathered inside the studio. The youngest was Intabiseng, 23, an apprentice architect who had once been asked to leave her position because she could not afford housing near Sandton. The others were construction managers, interior designers, engineers, and artisans searching for opportunities to return to their professions. 5 of Protea Ridge's 6 rental homes were now occupied. The studio had secured a long-term training contract. The conference space generated enough revenue to cover the loan interest and maintain the fellowship fund. Refilwe had not become the wealthiest woman in Sandton, but the development now stood firmly on real income, real work, and decisions recorded with complete transparency. At the end of the guest sitting area, Mamampo appeared in a royal blue dress embroidered with silver thread. She had not come as Thabiso's representative, nor did she step onto the stage to turn her apology into a performance. After the speeches, she found Refilwe beside the garden. "I taught my son that a good woman would always stay," Mampo said. "I never taught him how to become the kind of man who would make her want to stay." Refilwe looked at her. "Change requires more than one apology." "I know, but sincere apology can still be a place to begin." Mamamfo nodded. They did not embrace. Some wounds did not need to be covered by a dramatic emotional moment in order for the truth to matter. As the sun lowered behind the Sandton Towers, Refilwe invited Intabiseng onto the stage. She removed the protea-shaped key from her neck and placed it in the young architect's hand. "This key opens the fellowship's first studio," Refilwe said. "But what matters more is that you learn to build a life from which no one can ever drive you out of yourself." Applause echoed through the garden. Refilwe looked toward the main residence where the small bag she had carried that night had once sat alone inside the vast foyer. Now the house was filled with laughter, ideas, and women who no longer needed anyone's permission to believe in their own abilities. Thabiso had believed he was throwing her out of a home. In truth, he had only closed the final door that had kept her trapped inside a life that had become too small. And Refilwe had opened the remaining gate herself. 1 year after the opening of the Protea Women in Design Fellowship, Protea Ridge was no longer an abandoned property development. It had become a thriving community in the heart of Sandton. All 6 homes were occupied. The studio's schedule was fully booked, and the first 3 fellows had launched small design businesses of their own. Refilwe still lived in the main residence, but it no longer felt too large. Every weekend, Boy came over for dinner, Kenilwe brought fresh flowers, and the laughter of young women echoed through the Protea garden. Thabiso gradually began to change as well. He fully repaid the money owed to the company, returned to work in a limited role, and began accepting responsibility instead of trying to protect his image. Refilwe did not return to him, but she no longer carried bitterness with her. One afternoon, as she stood watching the protea flowers bloom beneath the sunlight, she realized that what she had once called a loss had actually cleared the way for a more honest life. The new home had not saved her. What saved her were her clear-minded choices, her self-respect, and the courage to rebuild herself. The greatest value of this story does not lie in the mansion, the money, or the moment Thabiso stood in shock outside the gates of Protea Ridge. What matters most is that Refilwe stopped waiting for someone else to recognize her worth. She did not seek revenge by destroying her husband, nor did she use her pain as an excuse to hurt another woman. She chose clarity, evidence, accountability, and a future strong enough to survive even after her marriage ended. Many women sacrifice their careers, time, and dreams to care for their families. Those sacrifices deserve to be valued, but they should never become an excuse for others to treat them as dependents or assume that they no longer have the right to make their own choices. Love does not require a woman to make herself smaller. Forgiveness does not require her to return to a place where she once lost her voice. I believe a healthy relationship should not depend on one person constantly giving while the other continues taking. It requires two people who recognize each other's efforts, apologize when they are wrong, and protected the dignity of the person they once promised to love. When respect disappears, the most courageous choice is not always to hold on. Sometimes it is to walk away and build a healthier life. What about you? If you were in Refilwe's position, would you leave immediately after discovering the betrayal? Or would you quietly prepare a safe path before walking away? Share your opinion and tell us which city you are watching from in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for more African stories.